I think all-out war with this enormous effort, with the rate of attrition of the loss of life, and we must come to that, I don't think Putin can go on for more than a few months, 3 months at the most. And I'll come to the figures, why, in a minute. But Putin is playing a rather dangerous propaganda game at the moment, because we've been hearing from Sergei Lavrov just a few hours before you and I are speaking, making all kinds of claims that the war goes on, the war effort is being damaged terribly. The latest target is Chancellor Merz, by saying that you could have deep strike weapons, the Taurus missile particularly, from Germany. You have no intention, so we go on with the war. But this isn't World War II. And the problem is that Putin seems to be adopting the tactics of Zhukov in the great push west and moving on Berlin, which was extremely costly. It's almost as if the Russian command had contempt for the lives of its soldiers. And this seems to be quite likely what appears to be happening, an echo of this in the attack along the lines of contact at the moment. And I'll tell you why. Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of Ukrainian forces, just a couple of days ago said, and this would be based on all kinds of assessments, including the British Ministry of Defence. He said that in 2025 alone, Russia had lost, that means lost to the balance of available forces, 177,000 troops since January this year. Well, you can't go on like that. If you don't mind me, I will add to this, we had Medvedev, Dmitry Medvedev, former briefly president and prime minister of Russia, and very much in the Putin camp, saying, oh, yes, we intend to go on. The old maximalist demand that we want to conquer, I think he used that term, or occupy the whole of Ukraine, and it may take ages. And can I add, just for a bit of historical color, and it isn't folklorique, that when the two sides met in Istanbul to negotiate face-to-face, the Russian spokesman said, well, it took 20 years to fight Sweden, which ended up in the Battle of Poltava, as you know, in 1709. And similarly, they've done a calculation. This is the Institute for the Study of War, on the claim made by Medvedev, that they could go on fighting till the end. And at this rate of advance that they're seeing at the moment, it would take 83 years to complete the conquest of Russia, of Ukraine at the present rate, at the cost of 50 million Russian lives. So in alternative history, counterfactuals here, we're in crazy country. And I think that that's the thing that's so surprising. And of course, you have to watch the Russian economy. The Russian economy is getting slowly into trouble. It's a very slow dive into a doom loop, but it is there. It is not good.
Also, you just mentioned about Russia's war effort. US President Donald Trump has warned that if Vladimir Putin attempts to conquer the whole of Ukraine, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. Is he right?
I think it's such a high-stakes gamble that Putin is involved in, because I think the warning from the more active of the NATO allies, like Poland and Finland now, the new ally, Norway, and don't discount Denmark and the Netherlands. They're particularly strong as Germany in their stance and what they've committed. And they're saying, if you are really going for a continuous on-off confrontation with Western Europe, which is the declared aim of Putin at times, that he is challenging the West, particularly NATO, but secondarily, and only just second behind, the EU. If he goes on in this stance, how long do you think he could go on running a war economy at this level, running at this heat, with 40% of all public expenditure and budgeting devoted to the war effort? Yes, succeeding at the moment in upping and increasing the production of Shahed-designed drones and so on. But really, and with inflation probably nudging into double digits, 10, 11% at least, and the deficit beginning to appear, I'm not so sure how long this can go. And one of the points of argument, and it's a thing that curiously, I think it worries Trump, is one of the main issues is now the ghost fleets, is the shadow fleet of the smuggled oil. And I think that that is going to be a real area of contest. And I don't think Trump likes it very much.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is confident that his army will be able to break through Ukrainian defense lines and capture the whole 4 regions of Ukraine until the end of this year. What is your reaction to these unrealistic objectives of Vladimir Putin's army?
Well, it is an objective, and you say, as you say, it's very, very difficult because it's very difficult to see which way the drone war will go, and it is also depends on what I have described to you as the Zhukov. As of World War II, the Zhukov concept of operations, where you sacrifice an awful lot of manpower and an awful lot of equipment. I think you're right to be skeptical. I think they're just closing off. They're about, but with great difficulty, getting control only of Donetsk, I think. Great pressure on Luhansk and, of course, Zaporizhia and Kherson. But I think that this is where, particularly as they come up to their NATO summit, the NATO allies are going to be very important in how they think of the next phase of assistance to Ukraine. I think that we will see how this one will go. We'll know it within 6 weeks as to what happens. If we're getting up to 250,000 losses, that isn't just dead, of course, it's a lower figure, but 250,000 Russians killed, injured, wounded, and taken out of the battlefield. If we reach that, say, around early mid-July, I think there has to be a rethink. And one of the things that we have noticed with Gerasimov and his crew, they have been very, very slow and reluctant to rethink their tactics.
Also, however, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has ordered his military to begin creating a security buffer zone along the border with Ukraine, and also Ukrainian military administration says that Russian troops have already seized 4 border villages in the Sumy region of Ukraine in this push to create a buffer zone. However, this advance has been halted by Ukrainian armed forces. What is your assessment of this creation of buffer zone, and what are the main reasons behind Putin's buffer zone inside Ukraine?
Well, this is where I find it very difficult to understand Putin's thinking, because at the same time as you're building the buffer zone here in these different parts along and outside, and they're pushing a bit on the line of contact, we see increasing activity with some warning and supported by satellite evidence of building up pressure on the frontier, the borderline with Finland. So is he going to say that the whole barrier from the Arctic, from the Kola Peninsula down south, going all the way through and into the Caucasus is going to be a line of confrontation? Is this going to be a permanently policed barrier? Is it going to require, as Putin has suggested, that he can keep an army continuously of 1.5 million in the field? Very, very big question indeed, because that's going to be tough to sustain, because it will affect standards of living inside Russia itself and the domestic economy. And we are seeing strains of that already. And of course, the other thing about casualty figures is that you get to a critical point. It's very hard to judge exactly where it is. But when you get a significant number of killed and injured, it really does have an effect on the populations of the big cities of the West, the Petersburg complex, Moscow, and so on. They don't seem to have been affected too much yet, but don't count forever. And the other thing is, how long can this cabal, this group, the Sulaki, the securitocracy, as we call it in UK, around the National Security Council, which are really the supporters of Putin, how much are they all going to stick together, or how much are they fighting for their own interests? And it was looking at that, we now understand from a latest study and biography of Prigozhin, that's what it was about, is that he would not accept the sort of the clanism, chieftain, warlord aspect of Shoigu, and the way Shoigu at that time, he's no longer there, of course, but very powerful, the way he was running the Ministry of Defense. I wonder how solid the solidarity of that group really is. I just put that out as a question. And of course, being quite ageist, of course, they're all in their 70s. There are very few young people in the immediate circle of real influence and decision around Putin.
From your perspective, does Vladimir Putin have a way out from this war right now, and how he can he really end this war, even if he would like to do so, due to Russian hardliners and other elements in Kremlin?
I think he's sufficiently vain to think that because he's the smartest guy around, that he thinks he does. And he thinks that his one card, big card on the international scene that he can play, and he's been playing him, but not really played him decisively yet, is Trump. Now, turn the thing out the other way around. They are autocratic, they're very powerful personalities, and each one has to be able to kid himself that he is smarter than the other one. We've seen this actually most conspicuously with Putin at the moment, because Putin has offered talks, and he gives Trump the impression that talks face-to-face, who with whom is never quite clear. Is it Putin and Zelensky, Putin, Zelensky and Trump, Putin and Trump without Zelensky? But it's always there. No, I would consider the ceasefire. And then somebody else comes up, or he would say on Twitter, or Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, said, well, it isn't quite. There's a bit of a problem here. There's a local problem. And of course, that thing of getting together, which Trump certainly was looking for, it's the thing he loves, getting together with Putin face to face, not just on the telephone. We are nearly halfway through 2025. We're 5 months in the Trump second presidency, and it isn't getting anywhere at the moment. And the thing that the card I think Trump can play in this is bringing the Chinese. How upsetting for the way they want to organize their hegemony in their part of the world. By that I mean trade through Belt and Road and so on. How upsetting is the alliance with Russia, which they have to supply quite generously, particularly with dual-use technology and various components, ammunition, and because it puts them in bed with North Korea, which they don't like at all, Beijing doesn't like at all, and Iran. And I think that this is where Trump senses if he can do a deal with China, and China really has to reassert its dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, which is where the real contest is happening, then I think that China wouldn't deny it, but it would make Putin realize he and his war in Ukraine are very, very secondary to what their priorities are. I think that alliance I'm talking Beijing, Moscow, looks absolutely solid at the moment, but there are reasons to question its long term, as long as the leader in Moscow is Putin, and the leader in Beijing is Xi Jinping.
Also, US President Donald Trump said on Sunday that Vladimir Putin has gone absolutely crazy, and he said that he's upset with bombing of Ukraine. Do you feel that Trump is getting even more frustrated about Putin's actions, and when he could reach this culminating tipping point after which he will be able to impose sanctions against Russia, inflict pain on Putin?
I don't think he's going to inflict more sanctions. I do think he would like to get the energy market sorted out because of the presence of the shadow fleet, which is nearly 1,000 tankers now, by all accounts. He'd like to get that sorted out. The absolutely crazy remark is fairly typical. It's off the top of his head, and he will change this quite regularly. But it does underline something which is absolutely extraordinarily consistent in Trump. Trump doesn't like long wars, and in fact, he doesn't like wars altogether very much. He has initiated on the part of America very, very few military operations initiated, continued with others, particularly the surveillance in Syria and so on in his first presidency. But, this time round, it's the bombing of the Houthis, which has now stopped, and they have got a truce. He quite clearly didn't want to go for an all-out bombing campaign against Iran alongside the Israelis. He does not like the prospect of a war in Ukraine or in and around the eastern borders of Europe and the western borders of Asia, namely what we're seeing now. And that instability, it's not of primary importance to Trump, but it's of secondary importance. And the longer it goes on, the longer it becomes a nuisance. It unbalances his objectives for all kinds of things of acquisition of territory, but particularly assets in the Arctic and so on. So the absolutely crazy is a fairly typical off-the-cuff remark by Trump. It's typical Trump vocabulary, but it does, his dislike of needless killing is absolutely marked, and that is consistent. And I wonder if Putin fully realizes it. I tell you that Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel is beginning to learn quite directly how Trump dislikes the indiscriminate killing of civilians.
Don't you think that Putin could overplay his hand by delaying negotiations and by just taping Donald Trump along, pretending to would like to have a ceasefire deal by just continuing his war against Ukraine? And could this also trigger more anger from Donald Trump and other actions in support for Ukraine?
Well, I think we've got about a month to learn about this, because I think Trump will actually say what he wants and how he sees security for Ukraine, for Eastern Europe, and dealing with Russia if and when he goes to the NATO summit in The Hague on the 24th of June. It's not clear that he will go, but he should go because he wants a redesign of NATO. And his terms are clear. He wants wealthy European allies to do far, far more in their own defense. Well, if they discuss that in The Hague, then they must discuss a rolling plan. And this is what Poland, Finland, Germany, France, certainly Italy too, and Britain and the Nordic countries will want, because they must then work out what their architecture is going to be. But a reduction of presence, particularly of ground troops in Europe, is absolutely clearly on the cards. We've been told so by the Deputy Defense Secretary. Hegseth's deputy, Elbridge Colby, seems to be doing more of the policy driving, more of the policy thinking, and he has warned the Allies that this is going to happen. But it doesn't mean to say giving up on Ukraine necessarily. Trump has a soft spot for Putin, and we want to know more about that. I personally want to know why. Is it personal? Is it to do with money? What is going on? Because he's very light in criticizing Putin. He has been very light in imposing sanctions and imposing tariffs. No tariffs on Russia, although it's under sanction. Enormous tariffs on China, and now enormous tariffs on the EU, 50% declared. So how is all this going to come out? I think a lot now hangs on the European leadership. And although they seem to have their difficulties and their money troubles, I think Merz Macron and Giorgia Meloni, even, quite an ally of Russia hitherto, will really have strong things to say, and then they will drag the others, like the Brits, along with them. But it's peculiarly small powers that seem to have very strong voices and powerful figures that are going to be important. Who could have thought, even 2 years ago, that a figure like Kaya Kallas, now the foreign affairs spokeswoman and high commissioner for foreign affairs in the EU, would have such an incisive voice. She can make people listen to her, and she's saying, "Look, if we don't then defend Ukraine now, we're next." The Baltic countries and the Finns, and she's got the message across. And I think that's why Putin may overreach himself, because it's the kind of coalition politics he doesn't like, which we see in Europe, and it's the kind of coalition politics of advanced countries, very civilized, sophisticated nations, he simply doesn't understand.
Why does Donald Trump hate wars?
I think it's quite interesting, because it's part of his whole personality, because he's a performer, he's a creature of the moment, and wars take a lot of time. They take a lot of planning, by the way, which he's not over good at. And I think it's because he likes the showy art of the deal. You can go, you can embrace Mohammed bin Salman. And by the way, the deals that he has done in Abu Dhabi and in Riyadh are of fundamental importance in the contest in advanced technology, in computing, in hypersonics and quantum, that they're now toe-to-toe with. It's a big contest with China. And those allies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE are absolutely vital for America keeping ahead. They need the capacity, they need the power, they need the money, they need the ability to generate just that amount of electrical power, which you cannot do through any installations and formations and networks currently in the United States. All these things are very important. And in the way that they have to consider that for the way that they will compete with China over the next 30, 40 years, long, grinding wars, uncertain wars, which may have come if you had an outright bombing campaign against Iran, that's not so interesting. It carries too much risk, no guarantee of a positive result.
And let's cover our final topic. The New York Times reported about the preparations for NATO summit in Hague. However, there is interesting work toward the involvement of President Zelensky in this program. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and other leaders, they are afraid of the possibility of direct clash between President Zelensky and US President Donald Trump. Also, Wall Street Journal reported that Trump has been hesitating to impose sanctions on Russia because he dislikes President Zelensky. How do you see the main reasons behind this Trump's stance on President Zelensky? Why does he dislike Ukrainian president?
He's everything that Trump isn't. He's a brilliant TV performer in which he can write his own scripts and is original and funny, whereas the humor is very broad, very crude for Trump. He, with very, very low assets, with very low cards, I mean, given the kind of nation that he's leading, the economy that he is the head of, the war that they have been in and survived, which is a huge achievement so far, is really just beyond Trump. I think, let's put it like this, I think both in Putin, but particularly in Trump, what Zelensky does, and I think Zelensky, even now, just looking at him, hearing him, sometimes he looks very tired. I don't think he suffers from what I'm about to say so much as Trump, particularly, and Putin, and that is imposter syndrome. I would think that Vladimir Zelensky could see, I hope he can see, circumstances when things calm down a bit, that he can step out of office, that he can step down sometime between the autumn of this year and the autumn of next year. This is this kind of thinking is absolutely alien to Trump and Putin. And I think that, yes, there is a sort of mad narcissistic jealousy in this. He's a great performer, Zelensky, that he can turn up. And that's why you get these crude and childish remarks by J.D. Vance and his offsiders saying, why aren't you wearing a suit? Because actually the slightly fatigue-like zip jumpers and T-shirts are absolutely the trademark, are the look. And, if you're going to make, it's like the very contrived row with Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. And that was really crude performance because it was all about playing to the white majoritarians, the almost true neo-fascists in the MAGA movement, the white supremacists. And similarly, the way that Trump has handled Zelensky, a few people have said, oh, Zelensky should have been more tactful, or he should have understood that Trump is like that. But by and large, Trump lost a lot of people in the global audience by that kind of crude, boorish, bullying behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for your time and your insightful answers, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Yes.